If you have seen this video, you know everything about the crucial information to put in your PIF. But did you know that depending on the type of product that you are going to develop, the PIF requirements may be more specific? While all PIF follow the same basic structure, the content and depth of documentation within different sections, for example the CPSR, the proof of effect, or the safety assessment, must be adapted to the specificity of your product and its claims. So the idea of this video is to break down PIF considerations for sun protection products, hair dyes, product for children, and product with special claims such as free-form claims or natural and organic claims. And finally, beside the practical tips, I will share testing that are required depending on the type of product that you are going to develop, like sprays or eye products and more. Sun protection products have the most rigorous documentation requirements. Regarding first the efficacy testing requirements, the SPF testing must follow the ISO 24444 standards that is specific for in vivo testing of the sun protection factors for sunscreen products. On the other hand, the UVA protection must follow the ISO standard 2444442. I will make another video just about the most important ISO standards that you may encounter during your cosmetic processes journey. Another efficacy test that may be required if you claim it for your sunscreen product is the water resistance. And finally, one testing that is really important is the photo stability testing of the UV filters. Regarding the formula documentation, you will need to put in your PIF the detailed information regarding the UV filters used, the exact percentage of each one, the supplier specification for each UV filters, and as for all products, the stability data between your product and the packaging. Following now, I will share some additional safety considerations. For example, you will need to mention if there are nanoparticles in your product, if you are using, for example, mineral filters. You will need also to mention the exposure calculation on application area. Finally, regarding the claim substantiation, add in your PIF all the documentation for sun protection claims. If you claim that your product has a broad spectrum of protection, you will need to put the evidence, the data, and the results that support this claim. If you claim that your product is water resistant or sweat resistant, same, add those evidences in the claim substantiation section of your PIF. And finally, something that now sunscreen products all want to put on their label is the claim reef safe, because it's better for the environment. Remember that depending on the market that you want to target, sun protection products are at the interface between cosmetic and drugs. So the documentation may be particularly strict. I don't know if you are aware of that or if you have heard stories, but hair dyes have the most allergenic substances permitted in cosmetics. So the safety testing of your products must be very robust. There are actually many safety assessors that only work on hair dyes products because it is a complex product. So of course, in your PIF, you will need to have a subsection regarding allergen substances. You will need to detail a profile of the allergens for each colorant of your product. Of course, you will need also to share safety data regarding the colorants, sensitization assessment results, and as you know, when your product is launched on the market, it's not the end of your responsibility. You will need to have a post-market launch surveillance plan. So of course, there are specific testing that are required if you want to develop a hair dye. You will need to perform a colorant stability test, irritation testing to make sure that your product is not irritating the skin, and it would be a good idea to perform an allergy patch test. To prove your good faith regarding the safety of your hair dye product, you will need to produce a self-test instruction for your consumers. If there are warnings that your consumers need to be aware of, same, put them in the PIF. You will probably need to make a notice anyway for your product, so you can start to work on that to complete your PIF. You can add also emergency response information and specific contraindications. And to guide the consumers to use your product, share detailed application procedures with the mixing ratio, the time of application, and the non-intended use warnings. You don't want to be sued just because your consumers used your product in some crazy way. As children are very vulnerable, products intended for children require higher safety considerations. So you will need to include in your PIF the specific age group that you are targeting, maybe the body weight consideration depending on the age, and the usage patterns specific to children. Regarding the formula, you will need to justify each ingredient within your formulation. We don't want the children to be exposed to ingredients that are not really necessary regarding on the product that you want to develop. If you are using fragrance for your product, you will need to assess if those fragrances are potential allergenic ingredients. If you can, you will probably also need to enhance the microbial protection documentation, and if you can lower the quantity of preservative of your product without affecting the preservative efficacy, that's better. For products dedicated to children, there is a higher safety margin required. You will also need to perform some specific tests if, for example, the product is to be applied around the eyes. Even if your product is not an eye product, you may need to perform eye sensitization testing anyway, because as you know, children tend to rub their eyes constantly. Now, regarding the packaging, I think it's quite obvious that you need to make sure that the packaging is safe for children, that there is no choking hazard possible, and that it is child resistant. Now let's talk about products with special claims such as free-form or natural organic and others. You know that for each claim, your PIF must include complete claim substantiation. The European Union is particularly strict regarding claim substantiation, and this is often where documentation falls short. So first, regarding the free-form claims. So if you are claiming that your product is free from substance X, of course, you will need to provide in your PIF analysis that prove the absence of the substance X in your product. You will need to perform and detail the result of testing, threshold and detection limits, supplier certifications, and all the information regarding your suppliers in order for the safety assessors or the authorized regulatory to track where your ingredients come from. Regarding the hypoallergenic claim, you will need to include the human patch testing results, and I will even go beyond that and perform a human repeat insult patch test. If you don't know the difference between a patch test and this one, I have another video that covers that. Of course, talking about hypoallergenic product, you will need to list all the allergen in your product and provide a detailed justification for each ingredient. Same as for the hair dye products, put in place a post-market surveillance plan. Now, regarding the natural and organic claim, well, you will need to include in your PIF the calculation of each natural ingredient in your product. If you have specific certifications that are related to natural products such as Natru or Cosmo, put the certification in your PIF. And finally, it would be better to have a manufacturer that have natural compliant processes. Now, regarding microbiome-friendly claim, well, of course, you will need to make sure that your product doesn't impact the microbiome on the skin. There are specific tests for that. You will need to justify the pH of your product because the microbiome is really sensitive to the pH as well as the skin. If we talk about microbiome, obviously the ingredients that is really important in your product is the preservative. So you will need to justify the preservative system that you have chosen. Same here, I have another video regarding the pros and cons of different preservative systems that you can choose for your product. And finally, if you have scientific literature support, it's always a nice to have, put it in your PIF. Next, anti-aging claim. There is a lot of in vitro efficacy testing that you can perform, and those preclinical tests can be transposed into clinical studies. So if you have efficacy tests both in preclinical studies and clinical studies, you have to put them in your PIF. And regarding dermatology approved or tested claims, well, you will have to work closely with a dermatologist. Include in your PIF all the testing, the protocols, the measurements, the instruments used that support this specific claim. Now let's talk about specific products and what type of test you will need to perform. For example, for deodorant or anti-transparent product, well, you probably know that odors are due to organic volatiles that are produced by microorganisms. So you will need to perform an antimicrobial efficacy test. If you claim that your product is anti-transparent, obviously you will also need to perform a test with sweat reduction measurements. Most of the time, for a product like that to be efficient, the consumer will need to apply a large amount of the product. And the more product is applied on the skin, the higher the risk of irritation, allergenic reaction, or more. So it will be a good idea to perform a skin compatibility test with the highest concentration possible for your product. And the test that can be interesting to perform also is a closing compatibility test. That's something that you can also use for your marketing. Regarding product that you will put on your eye area. I'd advise you to perform ophthalmological testing because you don't want your customer to have allergic reaction, the eyes being a very sensitive area. You can also perform a test to make sure that if the product is in contact with a contact lens, it will not cause excessive irritation around the eyes, or it will not cause the lens to stick to the eyes or something worse than that. And make sure to use a preservative that is specific for this area. Finally, regarding aerosol and sprays, different tests that are not very common but are required if you are developing a spray product. For example, the particle size distribution, an inhalation safety assessment, a propellant safety assessment, or a spray pattern characterization. I will always advise you to speak with a safety assessor, especially regarding those very specific type of product and the tests that are required. The earliest in your product development, the better. And keep in mind that for this specific product, regulatory requirements may differ depending on the region. Now to finish, some practical tips. So talking about safety assessors, schedule a meeting with one before formulating your product, not after. They will be able to give you some crucial information that may save you time and money. Find information regarding those specific tests and update your budget envelope accordingly, because the specific tests may be, of course, more expensive. Again, since they are very special testing, it's possible that they require more time to be performed. That's something to keep in mind when you are doing your cosmetic product timeline. Regarding the data, keep the raw data, not just the summaries at the end of a report, not just the certificates. The raw data are really important and they will be required to be included in your PIF. If you want a tool to keep all your raw data in one place, check my PIF checklist tool, because it also comes with a checklist to make sure that you don't forget any crucial information that you will need to put in your PIF. I also provide with this checklist tool a guide that explains what info are needed. I will put the link in the description, or you will find it on my website cosmeticlabs.com. So it may happen during the formulation of your product, you will need to tweak something. So don't forget to write down any changes in your formulation development. Even if those changes seem insignificant, they may be required by your safety assessor in order to validate your PIF and then launch your product on the market. Check out this video to know more about crucial steps for your product launch in Europe.